Hi, everybody. Welcome to Big 5 Habits for Academic Success, how to supercharge your classroom performance. My name is RJ Jenkins, and I am a curriculum designer with the Columbia University Center for Veteran Transition and Integration. My role basically is to help active duty service members, transitioning service members, and veterans succeed academically in the college classroom, wherever they are in their process, whether they're just starting college, whether they're kind of further along or even just ready to graduate. Anybody who wants to supercharge their academic performance, anyone who wants to optimize their academic practice, anybody who thinks that there are little places in their study habits that could use a little bit of a tune-up. I don't know if that's any of you out there. If you're watching this video, there are probably some places where you feel like you could do a little better, maybe be a little bit more efficient, maybe be a little bit more effective. That is my entire job. I have a really cool job, which is to just help students become better learners, stronger studiers. And one of the ways we do that is by working smarter, not harder. You've probably seen that all over the internet when you look up hacks and tips and tricks about how to become a more efficient studier, right? It's about working smarter, not harder, but that doesn't really mean anything in theory, right? So what we're gonna do today pretty quickly, I'm gonna move pretty quickly through the content. I wanna respect your time. One of the things we wanna do when we're looking to optimize our academic performance is we wanna do as much as we can in as short a time as possible. So I'm gonna move through this presentation pretty quickly, but what I'm going to give you are a set of strategies. I say 5, but there's actually an extra one in here. It's actually 6 strategies for academic success. And what's cool is that you can start putting them into practice today. You can get done with this presentation, and then the next thing you move on to do, the next set of notes you move on to study, the next problem set you do, the next exam you prepare for, you can start utilizing these tools right away. The last thing I'm going to say is that I have 3 rescue beagles sitting right on the floor next to me, and they are napping and they are snoring. So unfortunately, I can't mute them. So if you hear something in the background, that is the snoring of 3 rescue beagles. Let's get started. Today's presentation, I'm going to ask you, we're going to talk about these proven research-driven learning strategies to improve comprehension and retention of material, right? That's what college is. It's comprehension and retention of material, understanding the concept, and then being able to talk about the concept, being able to apply the concept, being able to use the concept to solve problems. So we're going to talk about a couple strategies that are backed by learning science, that are backed by cognitive research to help us do those things even better. We're then going to talk specifically about how to implement them. So it's one thing to talk about a strategy, but it's another thing entirely to talk about how to actually do the thing. And so we're going to do that. And then I'm also we're going to talk a little bit about some tools to help you change your academic practice over time, gradually and iteratively. Iteratively, as you can see on the screen, kind of a weird word. It just means little by little in response to data, right? We don't want to revolutionize our study practice overnight. That's disruptive. It's confusing. It doesn't really help. We want to make big change by making small iterative steps so that we can stop doing things like cramming for exams, so we can stop pulling all-nighters, so that we can stop writing our papers 12 hours before they're due. We are all capable of doing those things, but we don't really want to do those things. And so I'm going to give you a couple of tools about how to do those things less often than perhaps you're doing them right now. Really quickly, I'm coming from the Columbia University Center for Veteran Transition and Integration. We live at Columbia University, but we face outwardly to active duty service members, veterans and transitioning service members across the country. We help folks no matter where they are, and we partner with higher education professionals like the folks who have invited me to be here with you all, so that we can help provide additional service, so that we can complement existing services, and so that we can all work together to make sure that vets have what they need to succeed in the classroom and walk across the stage to graduation. And all of the tips that you're going to hear about today come from a course that I teach called University Studies for Student Veterans. This course exists online, and we'll talk a little bit more about that at the end of the presentation. So what are these strategies that I'm talking about? Some of them you may have heard about, some of them you may have come across on on a hack website or a tip website. And so you may have heard about some of them, but I'm just going to condense them all together for you in a brief presentation. The first is the Pomodoro Technique for staying focused. Pomodoro is the Italian word for tomato. When you get a tomato in Italy, you call it a pomodoro, and it's after the little timer that you see in the bottom of this slide. It's a little tomato kitchen timer. Okay, and what the Pomodoro technique is, it's a technique that uses a timer, and it doesn't have to be the Pomodoro timer, but a timer on your phone, a kitchen timer, any sort of timer, to break down long periods of study into smaller periods of focused work. And the basic idea is 25 minutes on, 5 minutes off. And the reason this technique is so effective, and the reason that the research around it is so compelling, is that we know from cognitive science that we can only hold our attention, we can only hold our focus for a certain amount of time before we need a break. At some point, past that sort of, and it depends on who you are. For some people, it's a little less. It can be 17 or 18 minutes. For other people, they can go 60 or 90 minutes and being able to really focus without needing a break. But for most of us, it's 25 to 30 minutes of focused work with no distractions. And after that time, our learning outcomes start to drop, right? We actually require a break, not because we're lazy, not because we don't have a good work ethic, right? But because our brain is saying, I need to rest in order to return to work. For those of you who are gym goers, you will understand this, right? When you're lifting heavy weight, you can only lift it a certain amount of repetitions before you need what? Before you need a rest, before you need a break. If you lift weights at all, you know that breaks are an integral part of working out, unless you're an endurance athlete. And it turns out, guys, that studying for your exams, studying chemistry, studying ancient history, studying sociology is not an endurance sport. It works more like high intensity interval training, right? Our brain likes high intensity interval training. It likes focus and rest, focus and rest. And if we try to study for 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 hours at a time, our brain finally says enough is enough. And even if we're staring at the book, even if we're in the library, even if we're taking our notes, our comprehension and retention of material really suffers, right? So this technique works this way, right? You can see this sort of graphic. You actually plan your tasks, you think about how much time you might need, and then you split your time up into 25-minute focused periods of work with 5-minute breaks. And you can do that 4 times, 25 on, 5 off, 25 on, 5 off. If you do that for 4 Pomodoros, right? If you do that for 4 groups of time, you get yourself to about a 2-hour study period, at which point it's time to take a real break. Then it's time to go for a quick walk. Then it's time to grab your workout. Then it's time to make yourself some breakfast or some lunch, walk the dog, watch an episode of television, whatever it is. And again, those breaks aren't because we're lazy. Those breaks are allowing us to get the rest we need to return to work. So the other thing that this does is it keeps us from being distracted, or more accurately, it allows us to pack our distractions into a little small period of time. So if you want to scroll through Facebook, it's that 5-minute break is a perfect time to scroll through Facebook, to take that phone call, to post on Instagram, whatever it happens to be. 25 on, 5 off. The last thing I'll say about the Pomodoro technique in terms of putting it in practice today, some people like a shorter Pomodoro, 18 minutes. In that case, you could do 18 and 2, 18 and 2, 18 and 2, and that'll get you to your hour window. Other people like a longer one. So for some people, they like 50 minutes of studying with 10-minute breaks. They feel more comfortable there. You can sort of tweak this method. Whatever's getting you the best results is what you're perfectly capable of using. But again, this is an incredibly simple way to break down large groups of studying, large tasks into smaller, more manageable chunks. What it also does is it allows you to get a better sense of how long things actually take to complete, right? We are human beings are infamous at being bad guessers of how much time things take, right? We always think that things are going to take less time than they actually take. So this Pomodoro technique allows you to really get a grasp on how long study tasks take. The last thing I'll say is I like to use a manual timer. I myself use a manual timer because this is how I work. And the reason I don't use the timer on my phone is because my phone is a distraction. So I like to really keep my phone on airplane mode when I'm really working on focused study and then periods of rest. The second strategy number 2, using previous exams as study tools. When people think of average study tools or the things that they use the most often, they're going to think about their textbook, they're going to think about their lecture notes, they're going to think about their labs, they're going to think about maybe online resources. But very rarely do students think about previous exams, right, in the course as study aids. And I have something to tell you. They are the most important study aid you have. Why? Because your professor created the midterm. Your professor created the quiz. Your professor created the assessment or the lab or the essay prompt. So they are tipping their hat to you about what kinds of questions they like to ask and what kinds of answers they like to receive. So one of the biggest missed opportunities that students can have here, right, is they get a midterm exam back or they get a quiz back and they look at the grade at the top of the quiz and they move on. They shove it in their folder and they move on to the next class, right? And what they're doing in that moment is they're not paying close enough attention to what it is that the professor wanted, what it was that the professor was looking for, what kinds of topics did the professor choose to focus on to ask for more information about. One of the coolest ways to study for a final exam is to look at your midterm, look at your notes and say which pieces of the notes made it into the midterm exam. What kinds of things does this professor like to examine us on? What kinds of questions do they like to ask? Because if they're doing that in the midterm, chances are they're probably going to do that in the final exam. So you'll see the graphic here, that's a trail of breadcrumbs, right? The exam structure or the quiz structure or the assessment structure for whatever course you're in is a kind of trail of breadcrumbs that the professor is leaving for you to try to communicate to you what sorts of information they like to know. And so it's really important to pay attention to that. I think the midterm exam is the single most important study tool in almost any course. And if you're in a humanities course that relies on you writing papers, those essay prompts, right? What kind of feedback did you receive on that essay? And now's an awesome time to schedule office hours with your professor to try to get additional information. This is different than arguing a grade, right? You don't necessarily want to go in and argue your grade with your professor, but what you can do is ask for additional context, ask for additional color, try to get a better sense of why it was that you received the grade that you did so that you can not make those same mistakes again, or so you can continue to do the things that you did right. Again, iterative change over time. Strategy number 3. This is my favorite, and honestly, I think it's the most effective thing you can do. It's a thing that students are never doing enough, in my opinion, and that is testing each other before the test tests you. I'm going to say it one more time. Test each other before the test tests you, right? When we study by ourselves, we tend to be pretty poor proofreaders of our own understanding. We're not always great at understanding exactly where our strengths and weaknesses are. We're not always great at understanding where the gaps in our knowledge are. And where our classmates come in, where our colleagues come in, where our friends come in, is they can help us identify where those gaps are, but only if we're actively testing each other, only if we're actively assessing one another, right? So developing practice questions for each other, quizzing each other verbally, asking each other, tell me what you think the 3 most important things were of the lecture that we just got out of, right? Those types of activities are incredibly helpful to help you clarify your understanding of material and also to boost your retention of material. I want you to think about the last time you went to see a movie in person. And for some of us, that may have been years ago, right? But movie theaters have sort of reopened up. But I want you to think about the standard experience of going to see a movie, right? What's the first thing you do when you walk out of a movie? What's the first thing you do? The first thing you do when you walk out of a movie is what? You turn to the person you went with, or you turn to the group of folks you went with, and you immediately start talking about your favorite parts, your least favorite parts, the characters you loved, the scenes you thought were cool, the changes you would have made, what was really satisfying, what was really annoying, are you hoping for a sequel, what do you think will happen in the sequel, right? All of that conversation that happens after a movie requires you to draw up, right? To reference things that just happened moments before, minutes before, hours before. And part of what you're doing in that moment is you're forcing yourself to remember the thing you just experienced. And in that process, you are starting to commit that movie to your memory. When you call up scenes, when you call up quotes, when you call up characters, right? You are referencing the thing you just saw, and you are actually actively in conversations with other people. You are starting to commit that thing to memory. You are starting to comprehend it better, and you are starting to retain that information. If people took that technology, the technology of talking about a movie after you see it, and they applied that same technology to lecture, talking about a lecture you just went to after you just attended it, I guarantee you that you would see test scores skyrocket, right? Because it's the same exact thing when you turn to someone and you say, man, that was a really cool lecture. I was really interested in the following things that the professor said, or I was really confused about this. Can you help me understand? Or did I hear this correctly? Or wow, that was a really challenging lecture. Here's something that the professor said that I barely even understood. Could you help me walk through it? Do you think maybe we could look at the book, right? That kind of casual conversation over coffee after a lecture or while you're walking from one class to another, that stuff is pure cognitive gold, right? Because it's forcing you to reference the lecture you just saw. You're pulling up that information again, and you're starting to build those cognitive neural connections around the information. The more of that kind of thing you can do, the more you can ask people questions, the more you can talk to folks about the material, the more you can quiz each other and test each other and explore each other's knowledge of a subject, the better you're going to do when it's time for the professor to do those things to you in the context of an examination. So for me, sitting alone in a library with your notes preparing for an exam is one of the least efficient ways to study for an exam. Instead, get together with one or two other people and talk through the material. Create quiz questions and administer them to each other, right? Test each other before the test tests you. This just sounds like regular group work, and it is. But a lot of times people use group work to complete projects or to complete problem sets, but they don't use groups to quiz themselves and prepare themselves for the act of being examined. Now, of course, examinations almost always happen independently. So at the end of the day, you are responsible for your own thinking, but this is a super efficient way to make yourself aware of the material and to really retain it. Okay, that's strategy number 3. Strategy number 4 is related to that, and it also happens in conversation with what I call an interlocutor. An interlocutor is just another person or another group of people who can test your understanding of a concept. And what you're trying to do here is you take your group work and you bring it up one notch, right? In addition to talking about the movie that you just saw, in addition to talking about your favorite scene or the character you most disliked, right? Can you actually explain the film to another person? Can you recount the plot? Can you recall the most important scenes? Can you draw out the most important themes of the film? And then critically, can you answer someone's questions about the film, right? If you're able to do that, that means that you've really familiarized yourself with that material and you've developed something that Professor Cal Newport calls insight into the material. That's a little bit different than being familiar with the material. Insight into material is when you know a concept well enough to teach it to another person and to answer their questions about it. It also means that if you were asked to apply that concept in a different situation, you would probably be able to do it. And that's what most high-level science courses, high-level humanities courses, high-level history courses, social science courses, that's what they're asking you to do. They're asking you to be familiar enough with a concept that you can apply it to a new situation. Yes, Sometimes the professor wants you to regurgitate information. Sometimes you're going to be asked to memorize things by rote, memorize dates, memorize definitions, memorize anatomy. That happens a lot. But what also happens, especially in more advanced courses, is do you actually understand this chemical process? Do you actually understand this historical process? Do you actually understand this narrative? And can you explain to me, right? Can you answer a question about that process? And the way we do that is by teaching it to somebody else. You've probably heard this before, right? I think it's called see it, do it, teach it, right? See it means to observe it. That's when you're sitting in lecture. Do it means to apply it. That means when you do the problem set or you answer the questions, right, after lecture. And then teach it is when you turn to somebody and you're able to answer their questions. Again, everyone thinks this is a cool idea, but very few folks are practicing this. If you could set even 15 or 20 minutes aside for each of your courses and find one other student in the course who would be willing to do this with you, have them ask you hard questions and try to answer them. This absolutely transforms your comprehension and retention of the material. It's really strange to do it at first. It feels a little artificial and weird. But if you make this a process, I think you'll be surprised at how quickly you'll start to feel your understanding really blossom, especially in difficult courses. Strategy number 5 is something called iterative note review. And I've linked to a Twitter video. I'm going to need one of you who are on with me to just give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down if you can hear this. If you can't, I'm going to explain it to you. But if you can hear it, I'm just going to let it play for you. Let me know if this is something you can hear. You know what? I'm not even going to test it. I will show you that on Twitter, we have a set of resources called Learn by Tweet. And I'll just make you aware of this. Learn by Tweet. Let's get that really yucky face off there. See if I can find, there we go. Learn by Tweet is a set of learning objects that I've created in a tweetable format. So if you go on to Google, I'll show you this right now, and you just do Columbia University Studies, Learn by Tweet. These micro lessons will come up for you. This draws up our website, and here you can get to all of our tweetable curriculum for all 3 of our curriculum. This is Find Your Calling, which helps vets transition from school to career. This is University Studies for Student Veterans. This is where this academic support curriculum lives. And then Attaining Higher Education helps transitioning service members find a right fit college. But if you go to our tweetable moments here under University Studies, you'll find so much of our content in tweetable curriculum. And what we like about that, this is effective text marking, iterative note review, which I'm going to talk you through right now, effortful learning strategies, etc. You'll find all of that here, and it's really cool. But let me go back and explain to you what iterative note review is really quickly. I'm going to try to do this in just a couple minutes. I want you to imagine how you normally experience lecture, right? So you experience lecture by going to lecture, you take your notes. When the lecture is done, you close your notebook and you leave the classroom, okay? And then you probably don't look at those notes again until a couple days before the final exam, right? So now, or the midterm exam or the quiz. So now you've got days and days and days of notes that you took possibly days or even weeks ago that you haven't looked at for days or weeks. And so now you're having to kind of relearn all of that material right before a test. That technique is what we call cramming. And cognitively, it's a very inefficient way of studying because it doesn't work in tandem with how our brain actually works. So I want to give you an alternative, and then I'm going to put this link. You guys have this link, but you can find it again on our tweetable curriculum. It explains this process very clearly. Just want to give you an overview of how this process works. This is a technique that I created as an undergraduate student when I was taking a very large and complex course on human evolution. And there were like 60,000 years of information that I needed to learn. And I knew I wasn't going to be able to cram 60,000 years of information into my brain at the very end of the course. So instead of going to lecture, taking notes and walking out, I want you to do this. Go to lecture, take notes. At the end of the lecture, take about 2 to 3 minutes to distill your notes. Stay seated in the lecture while everyone leaves and distill your notes. That means at the bottom of your notes or in the margin, make sure you understand the most important information that was said to you. That's called distillation. That's step 1. When you get home that night, I want you to spend 5 minutes, no more, no less, reviewing your notes from lecture 1. 1 day passes, lecture 2. Go to the lecture, take notes. At the end of the lecture, wait 2 to 3 minutes, distill the notes from lecture 2. At the end of the night on lecture 2, I want you to spend 5 minutes on lecture 1 and 5 minutes on lecture 2 for a total of 10 minutes, not a lot of time. If it takes you 7 minutes or 8 minutes, even better, okay? Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday pass. Now you're Monday, lecture 3. You've had all those days pass, a perfect opportunity to forget all that stuff. Go to lecture 3, distill lecture 3. At the end of the day on lecture 3, you spend 5 minutes on lecture 1, 5 minutes on lecture 2, 5 minutes on lecture 3 for a total investment of time of 15 minutes. Maybe it'll be 10, maybe it'll be 12, but no more than 15 minutes reviewing lecture 1, 2, and 3. Tuesday passes, Wednesday, lecture 4. Go to lecture 4. I know I'm almost there. Hang in there, I promise. Go to lecture 4, distill lecture 4. At the end of the day, you go to review lecture 1. What has happened? You know lecture 4 back and forth, up and down like the back of your hand, because you went to the lecture, you distilled it, then you reviewed it, then you waited a day and reviewed it again, then you waited 5 days, then you reviewed it again. You know it. You've committed it to memory. You understand it. It's part of your vocabulary. So now at the end of lecture 4, you don't have to review lecture 1 anymore. Now you just do 2, 3, and 4 for 15 minutes. At the end of lecture 5, it's 3, 4, and 5. At the end of lecture 6, it's 4, 5, and 6. So you're never spending more than 15 minutes twice a week turning information into knowledge. Taking the information that's given to you in lecture and transforming it into your knowledge base. Now, when it's time to study for the exam, guess what, ladies and gentlemen? You already know the information. You're familiar with the dates. You're familiar with the definitions, because iteratively, little by little over time, you were committing that information to memory, because that's how our brain works. And you've given yourself an opportunity to go back and get it and bring it back again, go back and get it and pull it back again. You've gone back into your brain and retrieved it. It's called spaced retrieval practice. If you'd like to know the scientific term, spaced retrieval practice means practice retrieving information spaced out over time. Because if we give ourselves a chance to forget, we have a new opportunity to remember. I promise you that this iterative note review strategy, especially for courses where you're getting a lot of information about a long period of time, will transform the way you work. It will eliminate the need to cram, and it only requires a total commitment of 30 minutes a week, 15 minutes 2 times a week. Iterative note review, look it up on our website. I have an 8-minute video that describes it in detail. I have a 2.5-minute Twitter video that describes it a little bit more quickly. But this is a really, really cool technique. And if you're taking a class on human evolution, or you're taking a class on the history of China, right? Big topics, European philosophy, anatomical systems, whatever it is, this is an incredibly powerful strategy, and you can start doing it today. You can go home after you watch this video and you can spend 5 or 10 minutes reviewing the last 3 sets of notes you took for a particular course. Get yourself on this, and then the only thing you have left to do is stay disciplined enough to keep doing it and to stay consistent. But I will say this, any amount of this is better than none of this. I repeat, any amount of this is better than none of this. If you can even just do 2 or 3 minutes at the end of the day instead of 5 minutes. Any amount of this is going to help bolster your comprehension and retention of material. Final strategy, ladies and gentlemen, we're at the end. I think we're at about a half an hour. So again, I'm trying to respect your time. Most adult learners, as I've told you, can only focus on a single task for between 18 and 52 minutes, averaging out right around that 30-minute mark before learning outcomes drop, before your comprehension mechanisms fail, because before your retention efforts start not to be productive and sort of and work. They stop working. You start to short circuit, just like you start to short circuit after you do 20 reps of a big weight. You start to fail. Your muscles need rest in order to recover and continue working. Your brain is the same, ladies and gentlemen. Your brain works like a muscle. And that 18 to 52 minutes is only when you're well rested. If you haven't gotten enough sleep, if you haven't rested, if you haven't gone to the gym, if you haven't had dinner with your spouse or your friends, if you haven't spent any time with your kids, if you haven't walked your dog, you're not rested. And that 18 to 52 minute marker, it goes down even further, right? We can only focus for about 30 minutes at a time if we're rested. So this strategy may seem counterintuitive, but if you want to be a truly successful studier, you can't skimp on breaks. And you can't skimp on sleep, because breaks and sleep, go to a trainer at the gym, right? Go to someone who knows a lot about lifting weights, go to a fitness professional and ask them about the importance of recovery. And they will tell you that you cannot get stronger unless you allow yourself proper recovery, or if you don't, you risk injury, okay? Same with your head, same with your brain, same with your cognitive functions, and same with your the growing of neural connections, right? You need recovery. Take that break. That break is not being lazy. That break is giving you an opportunity to recover and come back and work more effectively. You're not going to get 8 hours of sleep every day. You're not going to get 7 every day. You're not going to get 6 every day. And sometimes you are going to pull an all-nighter, and that's okay. That happens. But the more consistently you can sleep, the more consistently you can focus and work well, because sleep turns studying into knowledge. You can do all of these things. Let's go back in the presentation. You can use your Pomodoro technique, and you can use previous exams as a study tool, and you can have an interlocutor, and you can test each other before the test tests you, and you can teach things to other people, and you can do iterative note review, and you can do all of those things. But if you don't rest, none of those things can transform into knowledge, because your brain needs sleep in order to turn things that are in your short-term memory and transport them to your long-term memory. So please rest as best you can. Again, if you're interested in any of these tools or you want to learn more, University Studies for Student Veterans is a completely free online course that exists online through edX. You can also go to our website, veterans@columbia.edu. And instead of going through to edX, you can go right here to our video library, and all of our video assets, all of our study tools, all of our hacks are here for you completely for free. And all you have to do is search by University Studies, and you come in here and you have activating prior knowledge, and you have asking for help, and you have Cornell note-taking method, and you have effective time management and effective text marking, and you have iterative note review and insightful studying. If you go to the iterative note review video, you can see here we have an 8-minute video that walks you through very, very carefully the iterative note review process. It's completely transcripted and it's completely downloadable. So if any of these things are interesting to you, or if you want to learn more, this is the place to make that happen. My name is RJ Jenkins. It's been an absolute pleasure to bring this information to you. My entire job is dedicated to helping veterans, active duty service members, and transitioning service members, no matter where they are, succeed in the college classroom. And you have professionals on your campus who are dedicated to the very same thing. So reach out to the folks on your campus who do academic support. Reach out to the folks on your campus who do academic advising. Reach out to the folks on your campus who do veteran resources and veteran support. Get the help you need on campus, but also know that I'm out here to help you too. If you want to talk about anything related to your academic life, if you want to bolster your academic practice, if you want to optimize your academic performance, text me or call me or email me, rjj9@columbia.edu. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for being with us. I'm going to leave on the picture of the center. Again, we're here to help. We're here to help students to, through, and beyond college. And I wish you all the very, very best on making the most of the gift that is your college education.